want to start off by saying thank you to the Canada Strong and Free Network, and in particular to Zoe, Ariella, and the great Adam Bullock for putting together this conference. Yeah. I feel very fortunate to be here today on behalf of Invenergy to introduce a panel of experts who will be discussing a very important topic. On a personal level, I must also say that it's a great pleasure to be in Ottawa in a room full of people who actually think that developing Canada's energy resources is a good thing. Imagine that. This conference has always been a special opportunity to connect with like-minded Canadians who believe in the success of our country, what we've built so far, and are excited about our future potential. For those of you who haven't heard of us, Invenergy is the world's largest privately held power developer. We focus on 4 key technologies: wind, solar, grid-scale batteries, and high-efficiency natural gas. To date, we've developed 31 gigawatts of power projects across more than 200 projects globally. To put that into context, that's a little over double the size of BC's total grid capacity. Invenergy has been active in Canada since 2005. Our Canadian head office is located in Toronto, and we just opened our brand new regional office in Montreal. We have a large development pipeline of projects across the country that are creating jobs and will provide affordable and reliable power for Canadians. Now, to our topic today. A crucial part about the conversation around manufacturing in the power sector is about the impacts of our supply chains. Primary materials are often mined overseas, and manufacturing of many components of the energy infrastructure is also done overseas. As recent events in Europe have shown, it is more important than ever now that democracies have the capacity to supply the critical inputs required to keep our economies moving. Our headquarters in the US recognized this issue and made the first move to address it by opening up a solar manufacturing facility in Ohio called Illuminate USA. Illuminate is a 1.1 million square foot facility that will employ 1,000 workers on 8 production lines. The facility will produce more than 9.2 million advanced solar panels annually by the end of this year, equaling 5 gigawatts of electricity production each year, enough to power 1 million homes. In our view, onshoring in North America, the manufacturing of this critical component of our industry not only has its business advantages, but it also does more to help countries we're serving by creating even more local jobs. Closer to home, Canada is going to need significantly more domestic investment in manufacturing to meet our energy system needs. Independent analysts project that Canada will need to double its current capacity by 2050 in order to keep pace with growing population and with electrification. With encouraging and future-focused political leadership in place, good corporate citizens will be able to come to the table and set up more manufacturing here in Canada, unlocking our potential. Other countries are competing for these investments and putting in place the fiscal structures to create jobs, and if Canada doesn't step up, we will fall behind. Our panel today will discuss how Canada can maintain these investments we have today and ensure that we are able to compete as more and more countries choose to manufacture locally. Speaking to these issues and how Canada can promote a manufacturing renaissance, we have on the panel today Sean Freed of Medicom. Sean is a leader with over 15 years of experience in business development, government affairs, public policy, and operations. He is a seasoned professional with extensive results in private enterprise, government, and legal circles. He has advised CEOs, cabinet ministers, and the Prime Minister of Canada. Currently, Sean is Director of Business Development and Corporate Affairs at Medicom, where he works hard to make the world a safer and healthier place, ensuring frontline healthcare workers have the protection to do their jobs. Next, we have Andrea Van Voot of Wellington Advocacy. Andrea has more than 20 years of experience working in the public and private sectors, advising some of North America's largest businesses on bilateral and trilateral trade issues. Andrea was the Foreign Affairs and Trade Advisor to the Prime Minister of Canada, where she played an instrumental role in the conclusion of the Canada-Europe free trade negotiations. Andrea also served as Chief of Staff to the Minister of International Trade where she oversaw the conclusion of trade talks with Ukraine, Israel, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And last but not least, we have Brian Kingston. Brian is the president and CEO of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. The CVMA represents Canada's leading manufacturers of light and heavy-duty motor vehicles. Prior to his current role, Brian was Vice President of Policy, Fiscal and International at the Business Council of Canada, where he led the Council's economic policy priorities and global engagement. From 2009 to 2012, Brian served in the federal government with positions at the Department of Finance, Global Affairs Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, the Treasury Board Secretariat, and the Privy Council Office. Brian is active in the nonprofit sector, including previously serving as president of the Ottawa Economics Association and as the current board member on the Banff Forum. I know I'm very much looking forward to hearing what this panel has to say, so without any further ado, I'll hand the podium over to our moderator, Yaroslav, to get us started. Thank you.
Ready to go? Ready to go. All right. Good morning, folks. We're looking forward to an interesting discussion, and we've got no better than these three brainiacs to help lead it with us here today. We've got, you're going to throw something at me for saying this, we've got Big Auto, Big Pharma, and Big Brain with us here. So,
I was worried where you were going there, dude.
But no, really, manufacturing is a very different policy discussion now than it used to be. It used to be a discussion about what do we build, where do we build it, what jobs do we create in the process, and have a nice day. It was always an economic discussion. But these days, it's quite evident that that manufacturing is inextricably linked with international trade policy, increasingly with geopolitics. So in short, it's now a strategic discussion, not just an economic one. So why don't we start there? I'd love to hear from all of you. How has the context changed for any discussion now about manufacturing policy? Andrea, start with you.
So first, just want to say good morning. Thank you for those of you that have stuck around for this morning's panels. Thank you to CSFN for having me, but also for fostering the conservative movement in Canada. It is amazing to see so many friends in the audience. I see my friend Karen Restool, my friend Jim Miller. I see lots of good friends in the audience, but also all of our panel members are folks that are either friends of mine or folks that I've worked with. I guess what I would say, Yaro, is I would disagree a little bit. Oh, and by the way, happy belated birthday.
Oh, thank you.
I guess what I would say, Yaro, to start is I think that there's a problem with the premise of the question. It has never not been about both economic opportunity and international influence. It has always, Canada's manufacturing base has always been about both. What has changed is whether or not the leader of our country recognizes that our domestic manufacturing ability helps us influence internationally and whether or not it's important to our economic prosperity. This was proven during when we negotiated NAFTA, right? The reason why we got the first NAFTA out of the United States was because we had a strong role to play in energy, and the United States wanted our energy supply, and so they were willing to give us beneficial terms on a NAFTA deal, supporting trade. Lately, particularly in the last decade, the government's answer to economic opportunity to Canada has been the solution, the answer to most things is government. It's not opportunity anymore. It's not negotiating free trade deals. It's not opening up new markets. It's not investing in entrepreneurs and innovators to grow those new sectors so that we can build manufacturing. It's the answer is government. We saw it during COVID that with the concept of minimum income. We have lost that entrepreneurial sense in Canada because we haven't unlocked the opportunity for folks here. And we've pitted industries against each other and parts of the country against each other. We have good industries and bad industries. We have good jobs and bad jobs. We have as a result, good thoughts and bad thoughts, good people, bad people. And that does not bring a country together. It does not put us on our strongest foot, and it doesn't present a coherent agenda to the international community who've listened to us beat ourselves up and self-flagellate internationally for our horrible, horrible economic record, and wonder what it is we're actually trying to provide internationally, what our role is, what our strategic importance is. So we're sending a mixed message. While we've done that, countries that don't share our values, that don't share common free trade principles, that don't respect the rules of trade, have taken advantage of us. And so manufacturing has moved away from Canada because the opportunities are greater elsewhere. There is no time more than right now, given everything going on in the world, particularly in the situation in Ukraine, that Canada is important and Canada is necessary, and Canada could be solving so many of the world's problems. We have everything that the world needs right here. And there has never been a time when we've had a weaker international argument on behalf of coming to Canada, investing in Canada, trading in Canada than today. And that's devastating. Like that is devastating for our country. It's unfortunate because of the incredible role that we could be playing, but it's the situation that we find ourselves in. What that is going to take is a leader who recognizes that we should be extremely proud of everything that we've accomplished, that recognizes that we should absolutely maintain an important environmental policy, that we should be transitioning, but in a smart, responsible way, and we should be answering the world's problems with the solutions that can be found in Canada. And I have a fan in the second. And unlocking the potential of the private sector, right? That'll take a leader who's willing to unlock that potential and who's willing to say to bureaucrats in Ottawa who've gotten used to the fact that the answer is government, to say, no, our job here is to enable and unlock the opportunity that we find in Canadians.
Okay, great opener. Thank you. Brian.
Sure. Thank you. Great to be here, and really happy to have this discussion today. So I agree with all of that. I would just add the context has changed, in my view, around the importance of a strong manufacturing base in a domestic industry over the past 4 years, and it's for a few reasons. First of all, of course, we had the pandemic, which exposed vulnerabilities in the North American manufacturing system. We didn't have the ability to source PPE. We had issues with ventilators. And it suddenly made policymakers realize that we have an issue here. There are gaps in what we're capable of actually building and doing in this country and in North America. And ultimately, it was the auto manufacturing industry that stepped up forward. General Motors were building masks in Canada. Auto suppliers were building ventilators. You have to have that core part of your economy that can actually make tangible things when the world is increasingly volatile. Secondly, what we saw with all of the disruptions to global supply chains is that we have serious vulnerabilities in things like semiconductors. 18 million vehicles were not built in the past 3 years because of a global semiconductor shortage. I don't know if anyone here went to try and buy a vehicle in 2021 or 2022, but you would have noticed that the lots were rather sparse. And it's because we're highly dependent on semiconductors, largely from Taiwan and Southeast Asia. And so I think that has also made people realize that, wait a second, how vulnerable are we in the event of other global disruptions? Do we need to bring more of that capability back to North America? And the Americans are doing that now. You've got the $50 billion US CHIPS Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing back. So I think those developments kind of underline what's happened and have changed the conversation around this. The last thing that has been very significant for Canada is, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, $370 billion US unleashed by the federal government to effectively promote emissions-reducing technologies in the States, and that completely sideswiped Canada's competitiveness in manufacturing. Unprecedented incentives, and it spurred a whole conversation here around, well, how do we compete? What sectors do we compete in? And can we respond to the Americans? So I think the context
These are all my questions I'm going to be asking you guys.
But I think the context has changed as a result, and there's a recognition now that, yeah, we do need a strong manufacturing base.
Sean, hot takes? Frame the discussion.
So I get the time limit. Thank you for having me. It's great to be on this panel, and this is a very important conversation to Canada at this time. I'd have to agree in part with all of you, and quite frankly, governments and Canada as a whole has prioritized manufacturing and various industrial sectors for a lengthy time with their various policies. What's important today, as Brian over here has alluded to, there was an awakening following the pandemic where there was massive disruptions in the global supply chain. So post-1980s, where there was a love-in on the free trade, and as a conservative, I'm very pro-free trade, and it's a very important thing for the system, we need to recognize that there are problems in that framework when there are bad actor countries who have taken advantage of it, as Andrea alluded to. There are geopolitical interests that have arisen and have shown their cards during crises moments when, at the end of the day, every country is going to be looking after their own interests. And just-in-time supply does not work in that system. So coming out of COVID, where we've had rampant inflation in many of our products, we've had lack of accessibility in core products that were essential for healthcare and so forth. The world is re-looking at how do we deal with it? And the question is Canada stepping up to the plate and recognizing those changes, and how best can it move forward in this new changed environment? And as conservatives, what can we do in order to work in this new paradigm? And I'm sure we're going to continue on in this discussion addressing those points.
Yeah, you've all made some points that I want to double click on as we go on. But first, so far there's been a lot of agreement, but connect the dots for me. You're all saying we need a strong manufacturing base. Why isn't it good enough for Canada to continue to play its traditional role of hewers of wood and dryers of water? Why is it that we need to, I mean, you've made the point, Andrea, that we've got everything here that the world needs, so let's do it. Great, but I mean, a lot of what we have is things like critical minerals, wood, water, uranium, potash. These are not necessarily manufacturing commodities per se. Should we focus on that and let other people focus on value-add manufacturing, such as our neighbors to the south, particularly in light of the massive subsidies that we've just talked about? Connect the dots. Why do we need to do it here?
Well, look, I think it is a gift that we have all of those resources in our country. It is a gift, and it's a gift that we should honor, frankly, and respect. But I think what my friend Brian will tell you, and I know that Sean has also experienced this in his sector as well, is if you have the raw products here, you're going to, if you efficiently get them out of the ground, and you have an environment that supports an investment climate that draws manufacturing, you're going to get the manufacturers. You're going to get the supply chain here. The problem is we can't get our natural resources out of the ground, and the conditions for investing in manufacturing in Canada are not great. We don't have a strong investment thesis. We have high regulatory burdens and hurdles to clear. We do have a highly skilled workforce, which is an amazing thing in our favor. But we have a housing problem. We have a tax problem. We have just a general high cost of business issue. And so you have to resolve all of those issues. But I think with the amazing gift that we have of the natural resources, I do believe that you'll have a natural confluence if you create that environment for investment in Canada. But our trading partners who are taking advantage of Canada being naive and thinking that we're all just going to make things together and we're all going to keep trading regardless of the circumstances are going to take advantage of us while we're waiting to figure ourselves out.
Brian?
Sure.
Why be builders, not just hewers?
Because it's all connected. It's all connected. So we're in a very, very unique position in Canada. We have 5 global auto manufacturers that have operations here, a number of which have now invested in battery plants. And if you're not convinced by the cost benefit and the economic spin-offs that industry creates in Canada, I have 2 words for you: critical minerals. It's all connected. If we can build out this industry and actually build a true battery supply chain here, the economic benefits to this country for generations are unprecedented. We heard yesterday in the speech from the leader that Canada sits on unprecedented mineral wealth. In fact, we have top 5 reserves of everything needed for batteries. So lithium, cobalt, nickel, the list goes on and on and on. And yet, we're having difficulty accessing those minerals. But if we can access those minerals and build out a required, just to give you a sense of how many mines we're talking about, 384 mines need to come online globally, 384 in the next 11 years to support all of the ramp up in battery production that is being planned right now as a range of industries move to lithium-ion batteries. We can be a critical player in that space that right now is largely dependent on China. So this to me is why we need to be part of that supply chain, because it is all connected and it creates serious economic wealth for Canada if we can do it right. But again, mining permit, we've heard it many times over the past couple of days, 15 to sometimes 25 years in this country. It is not, we're not making a strong case to companies to come and do that activity here. We need to do that. We need to do it very rapidly, and we will see huge benefits.
Yaroslav, can I just, absolutely, he's 100%
Let's do it.
right.
Let's do it. Come on.
Can I just follow up on that?
Yeah.
The U.S. government feels so strongly about how important it is for Canada to be producing our critical minerals and to be part of the supply chain that the U.S. government mandated the U.S. military to actually invest in production of critical minerals in Canada. The U.S. government has realized this, and the Canadian government hasn't. And when I challenged people on it, the answer was, well, from time to time, the United States steps in and plays a role in helping us develop an industry. Okay, well, imagine that the president isn't Joe Biden. Imagine that the president is President Donald Trump. And imagine, which, I mean, let's just hold on a moment. And but let's imagine it's President Trump, and let's imagine that the U.S. military has helped us produce our critical minerals and is helping to take it out of the ground. Who do you think lays a claim to those critical minerals? The U.S. military is investing in Canada. You don't think that he's going to say, whoa, 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 those come to us? And it took IRA and all of the discussions around IRA for Canada to finally stand up and say, oh, goodness, we should probably do something to incent this in Canada. And we still are struggling to be able to get our critical minerals out of the ground. Like, we are too slow and too naive.
Mm-hmm. John?
Yeah, so to add on to what Andrea was saying and Brian, there's a huge Canadian advantage here on rare minerals, on raw material supplies from like from the oil patch. We are in a unique situation, and I'm going to give you an example of another country that turned their natural advantage into an oligopoly and a global force, and that is Malaysia. We don't think of Malaysia as a superpower in certain areas dominating various industries. But in the 1980s, when the AIDS pandemic had come to fruition, the whole world was starting to realize that infection prevention control was very important. And they went out and they started manufacturing protective equipment, which we all became far more familiar with during COVID. But what Malaysia did was they had an advantage in natural rubber. They produced over a third of the world's natural rubber. And they took an advantage where the whole world started producing PPE, and they drew it into Malaysia because they had that raw material supply. And they converted that to a point where by the pandemic, by COVID-19, they were controlling over 70% of the world's medical nitrile gloves. If you add in China and Thailand, you exceed 90% being tightly controlled by 3 countries. And the supply chain started breaking down. And the whole world woke up to the fact that it got highly concentrated in largely one country, Malaysia, because of that natural rubber advantage that they were able to traverse into an exceptional industry. And kudos for them to do that. They profited immensely during the pandemic, but the supply chain risks were rampant all throughout the world. And taking that to a Canadian instance, today we no longer need natural rubber to produce nitrile gloves or medical grade gloves. We use nitrile, we use oil products. It can be produced anywhere. The NBR, quite frankly, Canada was producing NBR up until around 2010 from raw materials mined happily in Alberta and Saskatchewan. There's no reason why Canada today can't take that advantage and strengthen the supply chain and supply throughout North America or the world. And we have to look at these advantages that we have and convert them into global successes. And we're not doing that. And largely we're not doing that because of the various environment that the governments have put us in. We talk about having a highly skilled resource base of people, but we have a labor shortage. We don't have the right training programs in place. We talk about why Canadians aren't investing in their businesses to enhance productivity. But our tax incentives to do so are all off. Where are the tax rebates for that? Why can't we further invest in heavy machinery and enhance our productivity in manners that we are incentivized to do so? There are conservative ways of doing it that aren't just handing out dollars like other jurisdictions. But saying that in the post-COVID-19 environment, there are many jurisdictions that have waken up to the national security threats of these supply chains, and they are investing the billions of dollars into it. And if Canada doesn't wake up to that reality and broaden their scope of what is a national security concern, we're going to be left behind on these issues and still have these major gaps in the supply chain. We're going to lose out on a manufacturing renaissance that's going on largely in Western countries. And there's a huge opportunity now with our advantages, be it raw materials or resource base or even just geographically being next to the United States with our integration and our free trade agreements on advancing the global supply chain where Canada could be a leader.
Okay, let's unpack the Inflation Reduction Act a little bit, or IRA, as we call it in the policy hood. I'm glad you raised it. Otherwise, it would have been the massive elephant in this room. Huge volume of subsidies south of the border. And we've often seen this in the United States, and especially traditionally in the auto sector, now more specifically in electric vehicles. So very blunt question and an honest question. Given the deep pockets south of the border subsidizing their auto industry, can we compete with that? Should we even try? Or should we just say, look, we're not going to be able to catch up. We don't have the finances to do it. So checkmate on that industry. We will find and invest in another where we have a competitive advantage. Fair question? Yeah. And if not, then disabuse us of asking it. It's
a very fair question, and look, no, we can't. On a dollar-for-dollar basis, we'll never match the Americans. That's clear. They're 10 times our size. When you look at the money that was put forward in the IRA, there's just simply no way we can compete in every segment of that and keep every industry in Canada on a level playing field with the Americans. What we do have to do, though, is determine the industries that are of strategic importance to this country, where we have a track record of success, where we generate significant economic benefits to this country, and make sure we keep those industries competitive. And that's what you saw happen with respect to the IRA. You can't respond across the board. We're never going to match $370 billion, nor should we. But in specific areas of the supply chain, in particular EV assembly and battery manufacturing, where we do, if we get the critical mineral connection right, we have potential for massive economic growth. We did match because, frankly, that overnight, that piece of legislation made Canada completely uncompetitive for that activity. I can't state that more clearly enough. What the Biden administration put forward was unprecedented. So we had to match, or they would draw all investment into the United States. We did. We've secured assembly facilities in this country. Now we have to build out the rest of the supply chain. Okay.
Either of you want to jump in on that one, or?
Well, I don't think it's the elephant in the room. I think it is the room. Right? Like, I think it's the rules of engagement. You want to keep the sector in Canada, you're going to have to compete. And in order to compete, you're going to have to play the rules of the game. And the rules of the game in this case are a subsidy. But it's also interesting to see what the U.S. has done with IRA, right? Like, they are, it's very interesting to look at the policies that they've introduced in December and look at the foreign entities of concern list and see who it is that they're keeping out of their supply chain in the United States. Are we? Is Canada? I'm not sure. And so, yes, they are, through subsidies, through incentives, they are supporting the growth and the establishment of a domestic supply chain, but they're also achieving an important geopolitical objective, which is to get bad players who are not playing by the rules, who are taking advantage of poor labor laws, poor environmental laws around the world, and they're saying, no, you do not get free, easy access to our country anymore. And so you will get out of our supply chains. And it's because they are not, and look, I love our country. I love Canada, but we are Boy Scouts. We are naive. And we have to recognize that we are going to lose this game of production of our resources and trying to attract manufacturing if we also don't start to pick up some of these tactics to block poor performers, poor players.
So I'll add on to what Andrea just said on that point. In my industry, there's, even forget my industry, Canada as a whole, I think they have stopped one shipment of goods tainted by slave labor in the supply chain since the renegotiated CUSMA. Compare that to the United States, where they have enforced, through the US CBP, hundreds and hundreds of stop enforcements and investigations. Canada, as a result, sorry, 3?
No, in Canada, we have stopped 3 shipments.
But some of them we dropped after we stopped them. I think there was only one very pressing in the current field.
But we, just to put a point on this, CBSA has stopped 3 shipments of products that they believe were made with forced labor. 3.
And it would have been fairly recently.
Oh, it was in the last, I don't know, 8 weeks?
8 weeks. How long have we been signed up, signatories of the amended CUSMA, which
Well,
have this provision?
I mean, years.
Years. So we've stopped 3 recently, maybe to make a point. The problem here is, in this world, the Americans have stopped hundreds and hundreds of shipments. When America prevents these goods from coming in, often the overflow gets dumped into Canada. The bad actors of the world take full advantage of it. It undermines the competitive advantage domestically here when we have tainted goods being dumped into this country. And what we should be doing is enforcing our agreements, ensuring that there is respectable trade amongst partners, and we should be trading and free trading with partners who respect the world order on the same playing ground. And if they aren't, there has to be an account to it.
And I'm sorry, I keep doing follow-up, so I apologize.
That's great.
But just on this point, CBS, because of the financial situation that the country is in right now, CBSA is turning from its post-9/11 role as a protector of our border, of a security agency, back into a revenue collector. And with that transition, I don't know how they're going to focus on forced labor issues. And if that continues, then Canada becomes a very bad backdoor and we have been, right? It's what happened with steel just a few years ago. Canada becomes a bad backdoor for bad players to access the United States. And you know what that causes us? A problem with the United States. And so if our biggest ally, if our biggest trading partner can't rely on us to carry a common agenda on holding these bad actors accountable, then what can they count on us for?
And just to continue on that point, domestically, it undermines our domestic manufacturing capabilities as well. So you talked about steel. If we're getting dump steel from bad actors who use faulty labor practices and we're not competing at the same level, our domestic steel industry is significantly affected. We have examples whereby various companies were banned, or their goods were prevented from coming into the United Kingdom. They were prevented from coming into the United States of America. And those goods, as a result, targeting those countries in the medical space, were ending up in Canada because we had an open door policy. So why is it so difficult to enforce our agreements and our law? And as conservatives, we should be advancing and advocating on these points to ensure that there is a fair marketplace to play in.
Can I just add one
Totally,
quick point, just from an
100%.
auto perspective? Yeah, I completely agree with that, and it all comes down to aligning with the Americans and working with our strongest ally and partner. In auto, we're already getting attention from the U.S. as we head towards a USMCA review in 2026. Imports of electric vehicles from China are up 2,500% in this country over the past year. Our consumer purchase incentive that's meant to help people purchase electric vehicles, the largest component of that went to a vehicle manufactured in China. So that's what I call a policy disconnect. That gets attention in Washington when the Americans are trying to create a North American EV supply chain, and we are in a privileged position to be part of that. But if they then see these disconnected policies that appear to favor those imports, we're going to have hard questions asked of us. So I think we just need some policy consistency in this space if we're going to succeed and continue to work with the Americans.
Okay, so I really want to get back to this forced labor issue in a second, because it opens up a whole new avenue of discussion. But let me sneak in one final question on auto. You say we can't compete with the buckets of cash that the U.S. is pouring into it. Andrea, you've said that we need to vertically integrate. Look, critical minerals, EV batteries, et cetera, et cetera. Great, good idea. And Canada seems to have decided EV batteries, this is our thing. We've seen numerous multi-billion-dollar announcements over the last year, so this is going to be Canada's thing. But we just saw Tesla stock a couple days ago take a pummeling due to tepid demand. Ford, GM have both announced delays on electric vehicle production. Significant delays. So, did we bet on the wrong horse?
Short answer is no, and the reason is simple. This is the way industry is going. This isn't about government betting on an industry hoping that it has potential. Automakers have put $1.2 trillion into electrification through 2030. This is happening. This is happening. It's happening in a big way, and it's happening extremely rapidly. So the bet is the right bet. The question is the pace, and that's where the big debate is, right? And this is where I think the federal government has it wrong. They have just unveiled at the end of last year what's called a zero-emission vehicle sales mandate. They are going to dictate to Canadians what type of vehicle you can and can't buy, with the objective of 100% sales by 2035. That is the wrong approach. And, I think folks in this audience would understand this probably more than others, but generally with the technology transition, it's driven by organic consumer demand, not by government mandates. I think that's obvious, but that doesn't appear to be well understood by the current government. So now we have a mandate in place that is dictating the pace of adoption, and that is not going to work. What we need to see is more aggressive approaches to actually help Canadians switch to electric. Things like charging infrastructure come to mind, right? You can't expect someone to move to an EV if they can't charge their vehicle. And, again, it seems very, very obvious, but this is being missed in this debate right now around this mandate approach. So this is happening, the transition is happening. There will be ups and downs because it's frankly complicated to build a whole new supply chain from the ground up, and a supply chain that is largely dominated by China right now. But we're heading in that direction. We just need government to actually take a more reasonable approach to doing this. And just to give you a sense of what we're talking about here, the federal government's estimating we need about 450,000 public chargers in the next 11 years. There's 27,000 now. That means 100 chargers have to be built every single day for the next 11 years. So, I just look around. Do you see that happening? I don't see that happening right now. And that makes me very worried because these vehicles are coming to market. You're going to see more and more of them, but the consumer can't be forced into it. They have to make the decision themselves. And if they can't charge it, they won't buy it. So the bet is the right bet. The approach is wrong.
Okay, Sean. Yes, pause for pause. It's good. Sean, what did Canada learn from the pandemic? I mean, during the so-called end of history era of the 90s and the noughts, the Cold War was over, everybody's a friend, the world is a happy place, no more enemies, let's all work together, global supply chains based on best value, best price, industrializing new regions, regional specialization. It was a wonderful thing, nirvana, right? Except not so much. The last few years have been a cold bucket of water on that, on those 30 years of post-history. let's set aside the geopolitics element of it for a second, but the pandemic specifically, pandemic hits, and we suddenly realize, oh, PPE, yeah, we hardly make any of that anymore. Oh, wait, vaccines, yeah, we stopped making those years ago. Your take on that?
So I think the awakening there isn't as stark as you would say from the pandemic forward. I'll give you the context of our small Canadian company that has been evolving in the space since the 1980s. And we were founded by a McGill student who opportunistically entered the space during the AIDS pandemic in the 1980s and was trading back and forth with the Americans, supplying Canadian-made PPE, gloves at the time, that soon would be offshored to Malaysia, and shipping it down to the United States for their need. By the mid-90s, we went vertical and started manufacturing, and we got the technology and the experience by learning from the Americans, and we set up a facility in Augusta, Georgia. The timing was totally off. We bought a lemon. We were proceeding into an environment where everyone was moving offshore to a low-cost jurisdiction. So we had to reconfigure our business model and moved our expertise overseas to China by around 2000. But in 2003, SARS happened. And it was an eye-opening experience because now our largest manufacturing capability was in China. And SARS occurred. It definitely affected Canada and Toronto. But in China, they're very attuned to these health incidents. And the Chinese government took over, the military police took over, like clockworks, our state-of-the-art global facility. And the supply chain broke down.
Took it over, moved in, we're in charge now?
Moved in, brought in the military police, took it over because it was for national security purposes. They wanted to ensure that they had a safe supply. I'm sure they did it to other facilities as well. And I'm not going to focus solely on China here because as the evolution worked in the company, we realized from that experience, you don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. And by the way, our corporate customers, and we largely supply Fortune 500 global healthcare companies all around the world, headquartered in the US and Europe and so forth, they really appreciated the fact that we were still manufacturing in North America. And we were able to scale up and surge our production in a manner that we were supplying in 2003. We were supplying Hong Kong. We were supplying Ontario during their SARS incidents because we had a domestic base outside of China that we were able to do so. And then with each epidemic that occurred somewhere in the world, H1N1, MERS, West Nile virus, Ebola, like every few years there's a surge elsewhere. And by the way, our core business is just servicing hospitals and doctors and dentists around the world. We have a core business. But somewhere around the world, there are flare-ups all the time. And we've been building up that capacity. So we have vertical chains in Europe, in Asia, in North America. And our customers appreciate that. And we honor our contracts. We're good Canadians. We don't take advantage of situations just because there's a surge in demand because of an abnormality. And we continue to supply the hospitals and the dentists all around the world. But what happened during the pandemic in COVID-19 was an eye-opening experience because it was the first real pandemic. We've had epidemics all over the world. And like clockworks, the Chinese government by January 2020 took over our facilities in Asia, shut down our facilities in Wuhan, took over our facilities in Shanghai. But what was unique about this instance was our backup in Asia. In Taiwan, 2 weeks later, one of our major verticals over in Asia as a backup to China faced export restrictions. And within several months, we had President Macron come to our facility in France. And let's look at Western countries, look at their own specific interests. And our backup for Europe, for the EU market, was France. President Macron came to our facility and put out export restrictions saying that none of these goods could leave France. And within a month of that, the Americans were talking to do the same thing with their manufactured production, and we manufacture in the United States. 50% of our production comes into Canada, and we're a highly integrated, environment. And we were part of the talking points to highlight in CUSMA that, we have complicated trade flows, and it would be against your interests to prevent the flow of these goods back and forth between Canada and the United States. And I think, from this experience, what you learn is every country is going to look after their own interest when push comes to shove. And how do you make a more robust, secure supply chain? There's no real silver bullet. You can't rely fully on domestic manufacturing unless you have a completely vertically integrated supply chain. And the Americans try to do that using their military establishment and applying national security application to many areas outside of just defense, like healthcare, like telecommunications, and the list goes on, like energy. Canadians, we don't do that. But we need to start looking at that. But we're not going to be able to go vertical in everything, and we don't have the size of the market that the Americans do. But we have a number of advantages that we could utilize, and I'll let my colleagues carry on from there. But utilizing those advantages, Canada is in a very strong position with a complex, integrated supply chain into the United States to have a robust national security plan if we were able to develop a broader one than just the defense space. And
well, we don't have one in the defense space, right? Mitch McConnell this morning was in the news talking about the fact that Canada needs to start to pay up. Like, this is not a good sign of things to come.
But at least there's a recognition on the defense side that allows an exemption out of the WTO to have a national security plan. We have to broaden that. We have to broaden that thought.
Let's double click on that strategic side of the question. You've appreciate your perspectives on the pandemic per se, but Andrea, I'd like to start with you. The Americans have always understood this. You buy national security by fostering a domestic military industrial complex, period. You never find yourself vulnerable depending on somebody else for what you need, something as basic as your self-protection. The rest of the world is starting to wake up to that, okay? Whether it's Germany or heck, the whole EU, scrambling to find alternatives to Russian natural gas, whether it's China and Malaysia on PPE, as you've just articulated, Sean, food security, a whole new and complex discussion, critical minerals, semiconductors. There's a whole Cold War on semiconductors happening right under our noses. So, are we moving now towards a new world of semi-autarky, where every country ensures that it can produce its basic needs at home with a more modest degree of international trade? Or is that an overstatement? Or is it more a move towards a friendshoring model or a minilateralism model? Where is this going?
No, unfortunately, it's actually neither, because governments are useless.
You're in the right room to say that.
Look, I realize I've got a warm room to make that comment, but it's Brian's example about the EV mandate is perfect, right? It's the perfect demonstration of how government is just really, really bad at trying to accomplish these things. You set up a mandate, you don't have your charging facilities. You want to talk about where the energy is going to come from to build these battery plants? Yes, absolutely, we need more people working in our labor force. Where are they going to live? Where are their kids going to go to school? What's going to be amazing is they're going to get incredible health care here, as we just saw through the pandemic, because our hospitals can handle that influx and additional people. This is going to be fantastic, right? Absolutely right goal. Absolutely. The goal should be to encourage people to use electric vehicles and to support the energy transition 100%. 100% we should be bringing more people into our country to strengthen the labor force in Canada, because it is absolutely essential. But we lose how to get there. Like we take the big heavy hammer, but we actually completely mess up how to get there and lose people's faith in Canada's ability to lead. But I also think that because governments are useless, but driven by highly political motivation, friendshoring is not a thing, right? If there is another crisis, if there's another pandemic, if there's another situation, unless Canada has a unique thing to offer a country that they cannot find somewhere else, we will be in the same position. Countries have to stop for a moment and think, okay, I'm going to figure the right way to word this. I can't upset Canada because then they won't send me X. And unless we are able to have that conversation and have people really, our allies around the world, understand that, we don't have leverage, and we will be in a situation again if we're in trouble, that we are relying on the fact that people like us. And at the end of the day, that doesn't win you votes if you're another country, and it isn't particular. You can't take that to the bank.
Do you foresee a future where we have punitive tariffs over issues such as, well, whatever, pick your value, forced labor, child labor, carbon footprint, for heaven's sake, whatever governments decide to apply on it? Yes.
Yeah.
Is that where things are going?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And
how do we, is it possible to ensure that that discussion or that policy framework does not become politicized?
good luck. You know, I think on forced labor there should be. And I don't know what the answer is to a border adjustment tax because I mean, my goodness, recently CBSA just tried to come out and say, okay, we're going to change the valuation for duty policy, which is actually going to increase the cost of every single input. We don't do these things well. But I don't think that we can hold other countries accountable. Well, look, I don't think we're going to win by implementing tariffs. I do think that we need to have to try and affect behavior, particularly on forced labor through tariffs, like and really strong border measures, and you know, public shaming. You know, I don't think that the solution to other countries and their bad acting in certain areas is going to be solved by tariffs. I think it has to be solved by, and you're not going to get this because the international community is even more useless than an individual government, which is why I'm so confused by why people are so upset about the WEF. Like, if you've ever been to the WEF, it is one of the most useless meetings I've ever been to. Like, nothing actually happens. You put 800 people in a room, what do you think they're going to decide? Like, really? But anyways, I'm not going to convince everyone in this room of that. But it's...
She just admitted she's been there.
I absolutely have. I did because I actually had to, I will tell you why I had to go there, because it was important for Canada to stay in TPP, because it was important for us to not be outside of a U.S. supply chain, and I had to go get yelled at by the U.S. trade representative. That's why I went to the WEF, because that is what it's useful for, is to go and talk to other world leaders and other key players. But I just don't, I don't see the answer long-term to things like, you know, poor environmental behavior by other countries on tariffs. Sorry, that was a longer answer than it should.
No, this is great. No, I appreciate your insights. You've been there. You've been in the room. You've been in those discussions. You've been yelled at by other trade ministers. So thank you for those broad shoulders on behalf of our country. We are unfortunately winding down to our last 5 seconds. So I'd like to thank you, all three of you. We had the right people for this very timely discussion. Thank you so much for enlightening us with your perspectives.
Thank you.